Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session. Hello, Cheryl. How are you?
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm good, thank you.
Lovely. We'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to pop over from the other sessions, but I thought we'd jump in and say hello. Do a little bit of housekeeping. So, Cheryl, just to double check, you've had a check with your slides and everything? Good.
Yeah, I have. Everything seems to be okay.
Wonderful. Good. Well, we might as well start with introducing ourselves. So some of you might recognise me from a past session, but I am Matt Postles. I'm the Deputy Director of the Natural History Consortium, and we are putting together the Festival of Nature, and which this conference is part of today as well. Carry on for the rest of the week with lots of activity. Check out the hashtags Fest of Nature 21 to see lots of amazing content going through across all of your usual social media channels. And I am very pleased today to be sharing the screen with Cheryl Willis from Natural England. And Cheryl, I might let you introduce your role, which I'm sure you'll do a much better job than I will.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. So I'm Cheryl Willis. I'm a principal advisor in Natural England in our Connecting People with Nature programme, and I lead on our work around social inclusion and the natural environment. So really thinking about how people connect with nature and the kinds of things that exist for different groups and how we can address those.
Fantastic. And what we're going to be looking at today is we're really exploring some of the research that has been done around how imagery is important in reflecting how people can engage with the natural world. And we're going to take a little look at one of the projects that we are currently collaborating on through the Festival of Nature, around exploring some of the ways that people generate their own visual stories through social media. But before that, I'm going to ask Cheryl to share a bit of a presentation with some information about some research that's been done for Natural England recently, really digging into this topic in a big way. So without further ado, Cheryl, shall I hand over to you and we can check this screen
Yeah,
situation?
perfect. Thank you.
Lovely.
Can you see those?
Thank you.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that. And I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to, as Matt says, share some of the research that we've been doing in Natural England around images and diversity in images and really how we can use those more effectively to communicate around our own messages and really speak to a diversity of people that, we know actually that really are missing in our image libraries currently. And I was struck actually in the opening session by what Nicola Beach said about the importance of a language that everyone can understand, so that it's so critical to bringing everyone with us. And this research that I'll talk about really does speak to that theme and really gaining a really good understanding of how we can really communicate with a wide variety of users to the natural environment. But before I get into the detail of that work, I'd like to find out a little bit about how you connect with nature and some of the things that you like to do when you get out and about into our beautiful green and blue spaces. So I wonder if you could pop a few things in the chat. I'll just give you a minute or so to do that. And Matt, it would be great. I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen. It'd be great if you could just read a few of those out.
That's absolutely fine. So yeah, if everyone wants to drop, it doesn't have to be an essay. It doesn't have to be anything. There we go. We've got our first one already in for quick off the draw. Obviously, it's who can get in fastest now. So we've got a couple down for dog walking. 3 for dog walking already. We've got one for wildlife recording as well. We get a lot. Oh, we've got hang on, we're thick and fast now. Wildlife gardening and walking. We've got more for dog walking, a couple of photography, a hotography as well, someone going too fast for their keyboard there. We've got some wild swimming as well, wildlife watching, photography, gardening, dog walking again. Lots of photos, coastal walks. We've got our first coastal one in there. Walking, looking at plants without dog as well. More gardening. We've got some camping. Whilst working from the window as well. That's an important bit of connecting with nature. More walking, food growing, visiting local park, getting children out and about in nature. Trail running is getting more. These are getting more adventurous as they go along. We've got trail running followed by caving, climbing, bouldering, bird watching in my garden. That could be highly adventurous. I've just nature sit spots. So that's like that's the opposite of trail running, isn't it? So we've got a huge variety in a very quick time coming together there. Just 2 seconds. The automatic lighting has turned off around me as well. The joys of live production. 2 seconds. I'll just turn the light back on.
Brilliant, thank you. It was so interesting to hear the diversity and the variety of things that we do to connect with nature, and some of those are obviously sort of active pursuits, and walking, we know, is particularly important, and walking with dogs, our mini survey, that's our the Monitor of Engagement with the Natural Environment survey, and our People and Nature survey tell us that actually dog walking is a huge motivator for people to get out and about in nature. And another piece of social media analytics work that we did, which analysed posts through a 2-year period, looking at the impacts of COVID on what people are doing and how they're posting about that, suggests also some slight changes to what people are doing, and exercising in people's gardens and in parks has become particularly important, and you may have been part of that. But also the sort of more passive pursuits and just sort of sitting and relaxing and being mindful of the nature around us has become really, really important, particularly for our mental well-being. And interestingly, somebody was talking about, looking out of the window, and we know evidence suggests that actually the benefits of looking at nature through the window are also really, really positive for our mental well-being, as is connecting through different digital media, so watching wildlife programs, podcasts, soundscapes, that kind of thing as well. And we know again through the pandemic that that's been particularly important for people, particularly if they were shielding and couldn't actually get out. So people have been connecting with nature in all kinds of ways, and even indoors, actually caring for pot plants and house pets. It can really help to improve our mental well-being and that connection with nature. So thanks for that. That was great. So our interest in nature images came about because we know that within Natural England and possibly out as the sector as a whole, really, that our image library isn't particularly diverse, and often the images that we use just don't depict the sort of variety of people in nature and the kinds of things, some of the variety in terms of what people are actually doing out in nature. So that can be quite narrow, a quite narrow vision of actually what is going on. So we really wanted to address that. And it's significant as well because what images we show send signals, of course, to an audience about what we as an organisation value and the kind of messages and the stories and narratives that we want to get across. So that a lack of diverse images really risks alienating some people, and for people, if they don't see themselves in those images, for them to think the natural environment simply isn't a place for them to be, and it doesn't have any particular relevance for them. And it can signal to people that they should be there for different activities and experiences if they don't fit that sort of traditional stereotype that we might see in some images. So we wanted to get some evidence around this to really understand what current images are being used and how effective they were, effective in terms of engaging a wide variety of users and depicting a wide variety of narratives around uses of the natural environment. And how they speak to some people who perhaps traditionally might not be engaged in nature activities. So we commissioned Climate Outreach to do this work, and Climate Outreach, or Climate Visuals in particular, which is a programme of climate outreach and the world's only evidence-backed programme and library for climate change, environment and sustainability images. So we've been absolutely delighted to be working with them over these past months. And their aim, based on social research, is really to change practices around visual narratives and communications, and to help move towards more diverse and compelling visual language that appeals to a much wider audience. So onto the method, what did we do? It was a threefold approach. Firstly, a literature review was undertaken to understand more about the diversity of users in the natural environment, the kinds of things that people were doing, and some of the barriers that exist in accessing nature for certain groups. And this also helped to reveal something around the role of images in connecting people with nature and developing that sense of salience and relevance for different groups. We also carried out a whole bunch of stakeholder interviews, and we have over 25 hours of interviews. And this really helped to add to this picture and drawing on multiple perspectives to explore how images can really reinforce known barriers to accessing the natural environment, and how conversely they can really help to inspire and attract new audiences. So we spoke to a wide variety of people, from outdoor influencers to those involved in communications in government, and also environmental NGOs, and also individuals from a whole variety of different ethnic minority backgrounds, which gave us a whole variety of different perspectives. And from this work, 6 visual principles were developed, which I'll walk you through in just a moment, which underpin a broader understanding of the diversity of visitors and uses of the natural environment. And content which really seems to demonstrate those principles was sourced from Getty Images, and also from Instagram accounts from particular influencers in the outdoor sector, and we have permissions to use those images. So I'll walk you through some of these principles. So I should say this is hot off the press, or kind of not quite, because this report isn't actually published yet. So this is the first time we've ever shared any of this. So I'm delighted to be able to do that today. But the whole
great to have an exclusive.
Absolutely. But the whole report will go through a peer review process, and once that is published, we'll tweet about that. So if you follow Natural England, you'll be alerted to when that's available. Or of course, just email me and I'll make sure that you get a copy when that's available. So the first,
we can always share that through the newsletter as well, actually, Cheryl, for that one as well.
Yeah, let's do that. So the first principle then is to use images that tell positive, identifiable stories. So positive representations tell a story that help to enhance feelings of inclusivity and belonging, which are really critical for motivating different experiences, particularly for those who are traditionally left out perhaps from those outdoor narratives. Principle 2 is about authenticity, and this is an absolutely critical foundation for telling an empowering and inclusive story that audiences, variety of different audiences will really connect with. And often we see sort of stock imagery and stage portraits that perhaps provide a bit of a veneer of representation, but they're not particularly empowering, and may actually backfire if they're perceived to be a bit tokenistic. So we do need to be really careful about that. So displaying real images of real people enjoying a variety of natural settings can really help to connect people on a much more personal level. And the third principle is about depicting in diverse landscapes. And by often we have sort of a very narrow representation of what that looks like in different activities in certain landscapes. But by expanding that representation, we can help to start to break through some of those stereotypes, which might prevent certain people from wanting to get outside if they just sort of see people in, expensive gear to hiking gear, for example. It may be a particular barrier for people getting outside. And the fourth principle explores the fact that the vast majority of people live in towns and cities. And again, our People and Nature survey tells us that most people enjoy the natural environment close to where they live in urban areas. And yet the most common imagery of our natural spaces focuses on the sort of the wider countryside. And so by increasing that visual representation of urban green spaces, we really help to develop that narrative that nature is everywhere around us. It's close to where we live and work and play. We don't necessarily have to get out to those more far-flung places, those more designated landscapes, although they are wonderful, of course. But just having those sort of green spaces close to where we live is really, really important. And principle 5 sort of builds on that a little bit, because the images that we traditionally see of an idyllic countryside and wildlife dominate our visual libraries and only partially represent the many reasons why people get out and enjoy the natural environment. So by broadening that visual representation and really being much more authentic and creative in terms of representing what real people are doing in these spaces, we can connect much more with a wide variety of people and really inspire people to want to get out into nature and really reap the benefits that we know that it can provide for our physical and our mental well-being. And finally, principle 6 suggests that by diversifying who is actually behind the camera can help not only those who are traditionally may not have engaged with nature, but also helps to ensure more authentic images. And interestingly, that there's already, of course, a whole variety of influencers in the outdoor sector who are doing just this, and we could definitely learn and work with them to create our new visuals. So that's just a snapshot of what's in that report. There's also a whole bunch of recommendations around curating new images and how you might go about that. So as I said, we really look forward to sharing that with you when that's available. And just to say, so the next steps for us are really to take these principles and to commission a whole new image library that we can use, and we'll be commissioning some creatives from different sectors, from different groups, to help us to do that. So again, we will look forward later on in the year to be able to share that with you also. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Cheryl. And that is, as I say, it's brilliant to have a bit of an exclusive look as well. If you want to take down your screen share, there we go. So I think sort of initially, if anyone wants to drop any questions for Cheryl into the chat, then we can pick those up as we go along as well. But also we were going to mention a little bit about a project that, as I say, we've got running live now. We are in the middle of it as part of the Festival of Nature, and that is a little bit of an experiment, really testing. We've been talking about this curated library of how we can empower people to through imagery to be able to see themselves in the natural world, by moving away from some of these very traditional kind of fleeces and walking poles and sort of wide open spaces, to look at sort of the ways that particularly have been highlighted through lockdown and the pandemic, how people can engage with nature on a much more on their doorstep kind of way. And so we've really been looking at this is a bit of an experiment through social media to see how people kind of curate their own stories around how they might engage with nature, whilst there's a lot of interest around this kind of area of how people are connecting with nature, how we might look at how people generate that kind of visual story. What are people posting on their social media when we ask them to share their own stories of connecting with nature? So at the moment, through Festive Nature, we're asking our visitors and our participants who get involved in any of our content that's going out this week to share their own stories of nature connection by sharing images using the hashtag #InMyNature. And so any kind of recent tags on that is worth having a look. But what I wanted to quickly share as well, because there have been lots of hashtags at the moment that are very active in this space. We've had kind of Connect with Nature that was part of the Mental Health Awareness Week that picked up a lot of traction a couple of weeks ago. We're also in the middle of the big National Wildlife Trust campaign around 30 Days Wild through June as well. And I just wanted to share with you, so this is, if I can get it to work properly, I'll have to do entire screen, I think. So this is can you see that, Cheryl? Perfect. So this is currently, these are the latest posts that have gone up under the hashtag of 30 Days Wild on Instagram. And we can see people really sharing the ways that they've been connecting with nature. So we've got someone here finding a maybug. We've got pictures of people's gardens and wildlife in their on their doorsteps and spaces. We've got cuddly toys and bees, outdoor breakfasts. We've got litter picking, we've got some of our own festival content there, walks in the woods with children. We've got a lot of these kind of little toy-based ones. We've got lots of walks, we've got planting, outdoor education. So you can see feeding the birds, bug hunting. So you can see you've got lots of people sharing their own personal stories through imagery of the kinds of things that they are getting up to out and about this summer as well. There's some videos and things there as well. And what we want to do is to look at some of this collection of imagery that comes in through the festival and through some of these wider campaigns, to do a bit of analysis and really start thinking about what kind of questions we can what we can understand about how people perceive this idea of connecting with nature, and also how they want to present themselves, because remembering that social media is not necessarily what people post on social media is not always how things are, but is how things wish to be perceived as well. So we're going to be looking at some of these photos as they come in. We're going to be doing a bit of categorization and looking at sort of how these social media users are interpreting the concept of nature, how they're interpreting connecting with nature. I think about what kind of activities do people think of as counting in this idea of connecting with nature. You know, is it going for a round of golf? Is it going fishing? Is it going for a walk? Is it, you know, pictures of wildlife photography? You know, how are people interpreting that idea of connecting with nature, and what are they posting on their social media? And also thinking about that sense of place. You know, Cheryl's mentioned already this idea that, you know, a lot of our existing image bank is around kind of a rugged hillsides and, you know, the North York moors, or, you know, somewhere like that. But actually, you know, what are, you know, are people depicting more urban settings? Is it more urban gardens? Is it you know, is it the seaside? You know, what is it that people are interpreting as that kind of natural space that these activities are taking part in as well? A lot of it is kind of, a lot of the conclusions we'll see what we find. I think a lot of it will be really interesting to dig out how that pans out, and also be really interesting to see who in those photos as well is sharing what. You know, is it our families mostly thinking about the beach? Are adults on their own more prone to be off on big hikes and things like that? You know, how does that spread out across different ways? And I think that'll be really interesting to see through some of that image analysis, where people place themselves, and how people like to present their connections with nature to the world through the lens of social media as well. So there's some really exciting activity going on there. It is very worth checking out some of those hashtags as well on the social media. Better with nature as well is the sort of long running one that Natural England have been doing around health and well-being in nature, and each of them have slightly different themes running through them, but a lot of them have this kind of shared idea of getting people out and about and sort of sharing their stories of how they are connecting with the natural world. So we'll, as I say, that's all very live right now, going through the Festive Nature. And if you would like to sort of ask any questions again in the chat, or we do also have the wonderful option where you can actually request to join us on screen if you wanted to ask a question in real life, which don't worry, we don't bite, which you can put your hand up just by pressing the button that says request audio visual. You can ask us a question as well. But until someone plucks up the courage to bring a question to us, Cheryl, I was really interested in your kind of six points there of the different principles around imagery. Is that there's a kind of like the sense of place seemed to be like a really important part of that, as well as the kind of sense of, you know, the who is in the picture and the what they're wearing, but also that kind of sense of place seems like a really strong theme that touched in a couple of those points. I don't know if there's kind of anything that we can expand on around that idea of where people are connecting with nature and where people are heading out.
That's a really interesting point, Matt, and I think there's a couple of things in that. I think that where nature is for people and what they consider to be nature and where they are connecting is really important. You know, as we talked about, if we're just sort of depicting idyllic countryside images of faraway places that some people have little opportunity to be able to get to, it's unlikely that they'll see, you know, the natural environment as a space for them, but actually depicting those spaces that they are familiar with, that are so that we can connect with what is important to people is absolutely critical here. And I think that sense of place and belonging is also it's really important to help develop that sense of care and stewardship that we want people to develop around the natural environment as well. And actually caring for your local spaces, it's a really powerful motivator to get people out and to really see how important it is and to maintain our green spaces for, you know, current and future generations. So yeah, tapping into that sense of belonging and sense of place is really important, and we can do that in lots of different ways through imagery. And I think that probably speaks most to the principle 6 around you know, being creative with who's behind the camera, because actually you can get to much more authentic images that really depict real people in real spaces and really speaks to what they're doing and what's important to them. So that's something I'm really excited about developing through this new image library.
I think it lends itself in as well, does it? Just thinking about some of the suggestions as well that we've had in the kind of how people like to engage in different ways as well. I think we when we were discussing this before, we talked about the kind of the authenticity around what people do put on social media and things like that. And I wonder whether we could actually do a sort of a bit of a confessional session of where I know that there are several times when I have foregone posting any images on Instagram of you know, the kind of concrete pavement walks and things that I do as part of a commute, but you know, only post the very picturesque, the very nicest photos. And if you sort of were to look on my Instagram, you might think that I spent all of my time out in really wonderful spaces that have that kind of dramatic landscape or that amazing wildlife encounter, and then that kind of thing happens all of the time. And I suppose I want the question that I put to the group is, does anyone else sort of relate to that and feel like, you know, that idea of, well, actually, when I look back at the things that I might post on social media, they are all it's that highlights reel that really puts a bit of a veneer on the reality of going out and engaging with nature. Actually, most of the time, you're having experiences which are maybe a lot closer to home or on a lot smaller scale, and are nonetheless valuable, but don't make it into that kind of curated image library of the Twitter feed or the Instagram feed as well. So does anyone just stick something in the chat if you feel like you've ever posted something that was a bit too many highlights and not enough of the real deal? I don't know if that's kind of something that we'll be looking at in this research as well, I suppose, as well, isn't it? Is looking at that idea of how that kind of the idea of staged authenticity comes out, even if we're crowdsourcing those images through social media.
I think related to that as well, Matt, it's really interesting to consider when we are posting, is it a true reflection of what we're doing, or are we trying to speak to different audiences? And as communicators, of course we are, but whether that then sort of taps more into the sort of expectations of your own networks as opposed to actually what you're experiencing. So I wonder if if people would like to comment on that as well.
Yeah, we started seeing some things came through. I can very much relate to Adam's comment here about dragging your kids out for not another daily walk, as well. Gillian as well, like the idea of blurry photos, shows the sort of excitement of desperately wanting to share something that they've seen that's really authentic. There are some brilliant hashtags around like bad wildlife photography, as well, where it's kind of pictures where you can just see a bird's leg disappearing off screen and and things like that as well. So there is some great tongue-in-cheek stuff out there as well. Grass being greener elsewhere as well, Lewis, ignoring what is often right in front of us, and that sort of capturing the moment isn't always being the perfect shot. Yeah, somebody here about kind of wildlife literacy in organisations. I assume that is Jen as well, where we're sort of sharing images that might not even be UK native species, or sort of dropping in some of the wrong species for what we're talking about, for example, to things as well, where we're using stock imagery. There we go. And the sort of Steve talking about the using imagery from a very small area of space as well. So lots and lots coming in there through the comments. I think that kind of question of authenticity is a really interesting one that does, in this kind of very curated imagery world, it's a really difficult balance to strike, isn't it? Particularly as Natural England is a big organisation. I know a lot of the people who are working for organisations, in the room as well. Think about how do we do that in a really genuine way without it feeling really staged, and particularly when you're looking at representation as part of that, sort of how you ensure that you're putting yourself in those contexts where you're going to be able to showcase that representation in a really genuine way, and that real challenge of it being really tokenistic, I think, is that it's much deeper than necessarily your image bank. Is that actually you really need to have that genuine interaction and engagement underneath the image bank that makes your images, gives you those opportunities to capture those moments and to capture those stories as well. I'm not sure if there's a question implied in that, but thinking about how we can really make sure that our community work is underpinning those image libraries to be able to draw out those genuine stories and represent them visually.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's really about understanding your audiences, understanding what people are doing, genuinely where they're going and what they're doing, what they're really enjoying. We had so many through the social media analytics work that I mentioned. We trawled through, I think it was about 2 million Twitter posts that were analysed there. And that gave us a really nice picture of actually, some the diversity of ways that people were engaging, and some of the things that that we can pick up looking at differences in different groups, and some of the different family groups, and what they're doing and where they're going, and the kind of needs that they have, and some of the barriers to accessing different environments. So there's a we can learn from this, and it's great to be able to see this, in real time, as it were.
And I think that there's a real it's really helpful that actually the question that Steve has put in there as well, or I suppose the statement of you have to ask yourself why you are using that image every time you post one. And I don't know if some organizations as well, particularly smaller organizations who might not have access to a lot of high quality photography, or maybe very limited in their image banks, maybe who run a small number of activities per year, or do a limited amount that is face-to-face engagement, particularly over the last 2 years. I know that where we're having to reuse some of the imagery from events past in order to, just because it's been very difficult to generate new imagery when we haven't been doing a lot of face-to-face activity over the last 2 years. But it's really interesting to think about what imagery people have available, and what and where people have had to rely on things like stock imagery, where it's worth investing some of that time and potentially financially in bringing really skilled photographers for things like events and activities to be able to really capture those moments. And I know that we've really benefited through Festival of Nature activity when we've had more physical activity, as obviously. Oh, I plunged into darkness again. To really be able to have photographers there who can capture those moments of people really engaging with an activity, or getting close to nature, and being able to really share that story visually. It's been so valuable to have that skill there, because it's not just the quality of the camera. I think it's the people who know how to get themselves in the right position to be able to capture that smile, and to capture that that moment that someone understands something about what they're looking at, and then that imagery is so valuable. Then go out to communicate about the activity as well. I know it's always a bit of a challenge for when we do, because quite a lot of our activities, often if we do science festivals and things like that, a concentration face also looks like a very angry face. I don't know, people have probably noticed this when they're on Zoom as well. If you see a collection of people who are on Zoom, anyone who's concentrating, everyone looks very angry with their computer. And so when people are concentrating and when they're learning, it's kind of, you have to really, it's a real skill to capture the moment when someone understands something and then goes, oh yeah, and actually look happy about what they're experiencing. But I think when you're actually getting people out in nature, not just kind of teaching them something or engaging with in a learning activity, that comes a lot more naturally. And having the right photographers in place is a really strong investment for people who, if you're running activities, or if you're really trying to capture some of these stories to be able to share for your organization as well. We've got about 4 minutes left before we need to wrap up. And so I think that what might be the best use of that 4 minutes, I suppose, is if we do a little roundup. Cheryl, should we? What I think would be really useful is perhaps if we reshared those 6 principles again that people can take away as well. And we'd be very happy to sort of share these. If you're happy for us to do so, Cheryl, we can send out a version of these slides for people as well. But I think if we refresh our memories of those 6 principles, because I think that would be a brilliant thing for people to then take away for the end of the session, since we have the 2 minutes.
Yeah,
are you able to get that back up? I've set you a technological challenge right at the end.
Yeah. There we are.
Perfect.
So use images to tell positive, identifiable stories, create authentic representation, not tokenism, that should be, depict diverse activities in diverse landscapes, rather than that sort of very narrow vision of what nature should be and what we should be doing, perhaps. Connect people to the wonderful diversity of natural places, from urban parks to national landscapes. This is one I love: fewer sheep and sunsets and more real people. And diversify who is behind the camera and the message. I think that one is so interesting. And as I say, I'm really excited to sort of test some of that, really, and really see how we can be creative and how that lends itself to creating a much more authentic image life.
Fantastic. Well, if everyone can join me in thanking Cheryl for sharing that that hot off the press piece of research, and thank you all very much for joining us communicating in this session. I believe that we will shortly then be moving across. You'll have a few minutes to just have a quick stretch, stand up, roll the shoulders, all of that jazz, before we go into our closing keynote in conversation with Darren Croft as well, who's the Chief Executive of the Woodland Trust. So do pop across to the main stage for that. But for now, just again, thank you very much, Cheryl. And if you'd like to pop your camera off, then we can disappear. Thank you very much,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye-bye, everyone.